So Jake, you just throw out these wild things and then you just go run with it. I don't know where your academic
No, it's a
background is
question. It's a
from,
question.
where you make
I'm not making.
such an
I'm not
accusation
making.
like this.
I'm not making an assertion. It was a question. I said why. My question was. Can I ask you about your views on faith?
Sure, have at it.
Awesome. All right. So I want to ask a series of questions, one which kind of lead into the next. So you mentioned evidence for the resurrection of Jesus Christ. I haven't explored that in depth, but I have no doubt that, as a scientist, like evidence is easy and theories are hard, right? That's what they say. It's like we can find evidence of this and that and the other, but the real difficulty is in, utilizing the scientific historical method in order to then ascertain a theory. So my question to you is, and I think you'd agree with this, but let me ask this anyway. So I believe that as a global society, we have a good method for ascertaining historical truth. It's not always perfect, but this method has resulted in a mostly accurate global understanding of historical events. So, for example, the Roman Empire, or the expansion of the Mongolian Empire, or Christopher Columbus. These events we establish as being, quote, true, accepted as true, because we have a method for ascertaining historical truth. So my question is, do you agree with me? Do you believe that we as a collective society have an effective method for ascertaining historical truth?
Yes.
Awesome. Okay. First question. Second question is, and by the way, you and I would probably both agree that, that method includes things like primary sources, secondary sources, contextual analysis, et cetera, cross-referencing, scientific methods. I could go on and on. And then, so the next question that I have is that, so given that you and I agree that this method exists, or this set of methods exists, and it's reliable for helping us determine things like the fact that George Washington was the first president, then how come the resurrection of Christ or other stories in the Bible are not in history textbooks?
It's in so many history textbooks. It's in so much. I mean, there's more
Like
written
if
about the
you went to Rice,
resurrection of
you went
Jesus
to Rice,
Christ than like anything else. What are you talking
but
about?
I'm sorry. What I meant is, like, if you leave your office right now and you go to a history classroom at Rice, and you go to the professor and you say, "Hey, give me your history textbook that talks about Jesus Christ's resurrection." Like, not that people talked about his resurrection, but evidence, like it's not I guess maybe my question is poorly phrased. Like, why is it not a globally accepted historical truth? This is a question. Why is it not a globally accepted historical truth that Jesus Christ was resurrected in the same way, in the same manner of truth that we've determined that Christopher Columbus sailed across the ocean?
Okay, first of all, those are separated by like 1,500 years. So Christopher Columbus
There's plenty of things that happened 2,000 years ago that we do know are true. Like we know about the Stone Age, the Bronze Age. We know about the Roman Empire. Like we know
with
about
more assurance than you know about the resurrection of Jesus Christ. There's no
well,
way. There's no way. There's
if you,
more documents written about Jesus and his resurrection than any other events of that era. I don't know how you can suggest that. The life and the times of Jesus Christ, and you talk about books, number of books being the answer for you. There's more written about the life of Jesus Christ than these other topics. So
I have no doubt he existed. I have no doubt he existed. I'm just claiming, like, like if I were to resurrect, that would break what you know is a law of physics. So if Jesus Christ was resurrected, that would mean that this really remarkable thing happened. And I guess my question reframed is, like, if you were to leave your office and go down the hall to a history professor and you were to ask this history professor, hey man, do you teach your students here at Rice University that Jesus Christ was resurrected? What would they say?
I would say they probably don't teach that. But that's
So let's
but
talk
if you
about
go
that.
to
I wanna ask
the
about that.
religion department, they would
Yeah.
teach it, and it's historical, and
They would also teach Islam,
any
they'd also teach Hinduism, they'd also teach
yeah,
Buddhism,
and
right?
any professor of religion, any
Mhm.
professor of religion,
Yeah.
regardless of what religion they personally have or what religious topic, they would agree in academics that the disciples had believed that Jesus Christ had risen from the dead. they would
Of course
believe
they do.
this, and they would talk about the crucifixion of Jesus, and that the disciples believed that he had risen from the dead, and the disciples wrote about that.
Why
But
is it not in the history? Why is it
be,
not in the
be,
history class? That's what I'm wondering.
well, this is such a remarkable event. As far as Jesus, he's all over history classes. I'm not. The life of Jesus is all over history
No,
classes.
no,
But if you want to talk
the
about the
literal
resurrection,
resurrection.
because it's
Yeah,
such
yeah.
a miraculous thing that it's very hard for people to embrace something that this is so miraculous. You know, the Bible says that you have to confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart that he's risen from the dead in order to be saved. Romans 10:9. This is
Mhm.
a crazy hard requirement. Why would they put in there, you have to believe in your heart that he's risen from the dead in order to be saved? How can any thinking man or woman believe that Jesus has physically raised from the dead? But that's the requirement in order to be saved. If these guys were just trying to start a new religion, they never would have put that. They would have said, you got to believe Jesus loved children, or you got to believe Jesus loved puppies. I mean, something simple. This is
Yeah,
crazy hard.
yeah.
Yeah.
No, I'm just I hear what you're saying, and I tell me if my question's stupid or something, but like again, my question remains: why don't history professors at Rice University teach the resurrection of Christ?
Bec-
I understand. By the way, religious professors are teaching religion, so they talk about Buddhism, Islam, all the other religious myths and stories. But history professors at Rice don't teach students that Jesus Christ was resurrected.
because it's a miracle, because we don't have a whole lot of data points on this.
But right, but you said at the beginning, I asked you, do you agree that we have a method for ascertaining historical truth? And you said yes.
Yes.
And that's,
And how
that
do you ascertain historical truth? You ask the people around from the day. You look at the writings from the day. This is how you
right.
ascertain truth. You look at the writings from the day, you look at the people from the day. And there was a concerted effort by the Jews to silence this thing, and still it exploded. What's interesting, I mean, you like to quote the Romans. So we have Tacitus. Tacitus writes about how they were killing the Christians. Tacitus was the one who tells us about how Nero set Rome on fire and blamed it on the Christians. I mean, he was a historian. He was also a Roman senator. He talks about how they were putting Christians to death, how they would wrap fresh animal skins around them, and these Christians were going to their death saying that Jesus Christ had risen from the dead. Pliny the Younger, who was a Roman governor in Asia Minor, which is current day Turkey, he writes a long letter. So we have his letter. He writes a long letter to Trajan, who's the emperor of Rome, and he says, "I have all these Christians. I'm putting them to death, and they say that they're worshiping this Jesus who's risen from the dead. Is it a good thing that I'm putting them to death? Should I still do this?" And Trajan said, "Yeah, put them to death. I mean, if they're not worshiping my image and they're talking this nonsense, put them to death." So there are lots of people saying that Jesus Christ has risen from the dead. In the Bible, it gives the account. It gives the account of this. And it says
Of
there were
course.
over 500 people at one time that saw Jesus. Paul
Yeah.
just lists all the people that
But the
saw Jesus
Bible,
risen from the dead.
we don't use the Bible to infer historical truth. Like that's, but I guess,
Who doesn't
so
use the
here's the,
Bible to infer historical truth? Do you think the
well,
Bible is
like, so
devoid of
from
it?
that,
I mean, just so much of what was written about by the Romans, and it matches up with what the historian Josephus
yeah.
is writing about. I don't see where you come with this that
Mhm.
you can't use the Bible for historical truth.
Yeah, it's a source, but so here's the crux of my where I'm not where I'm having a hard time is that you agree that as a society we have a great method for ascertaining historical truth, and that's why if you walk down the hall right now and you walk into a history classroom, you don't believe that those professors are full of it. You know, you believe what they say because we have this remarkable ability to ascertain, to a good degree, historical truth, even 2,000 years ago. And yet, those classes are not talking about in a historical sense. You know, Moses parting the sea, Jesus' resurrection, the talking snake. And my point is that to me, it seems like those stories in the Bible don't meet the threshold described by the method that you and I agree is a good method. And yeah, there's evidence of Jesus and there's of this and that, and there's tons of evidence out there of different biblical stories. My point is that those stories, unfortunately, haven't met the threshold that other stories have met, like Christopher Columbus sailing across the ocean as an example. That's my point. And my question just comes back to, like, I still am not understand, like, why are they not taught in history classrooms? That's what I don't understand.
Do ships travel on an ocean?
Yeah.
Do ships fly?
No.
Okay. So if there were an event where a ship was flying,
You need extraordinary evidence to know that, for me to
yeah,
believe it. Yeah.
it's a much harder thing for people to
Yes.
embrace. So what I am telling you is that when you look at the biblical accounts, most of what's written in the Bible is not miraculous. Most of what's written in the Bible is quite mundane things of life. There were battles, there were wars, there were kingdoms that came. There was Nebuchadnezzar, there was King Sennacherib of Assyria, and all of these things are documented by lots of other sources around them. If you talk about the flood is actually talked about by many other sources outside the Bible. Many religious traditions talk about a flood. Their religious documents
There
talk
probably
about.
was a flood.
So, so,
Why
so,
not?
so
It's totally realistic. We have
we
floods
have
today.
floods
Like,
today. I mean, look
believe
at
there's a
Houston this week. So, when you come to the miraculous, it's a different sort of thing in the sense that you don't have a lot of these things. So this,
So then let's agree right here and now that my first premise, that we have as a global society have an effective method for ascertaining historical truth. Let's say that's false. That is not true, because what you're saying is that the events that you do believe happened are somehow the whatever method that the Rice history professors are using to talk about history, they are failing to account for the resurrection of Jesus Christ. And therefore, the Rice professors don't have an effective way for determining historical truth, because Jesus' resurrection was true and the Rice professors don't think it's true. So therefore, we don't have a good method for ascertaining historical truth, right?
no, there are
You see my disconnect? You see my disconnect where it is?
I
Like,
see your
yeah.
disconnect, but I think it's a silly little argument that you keep putting
Okay.
forward here. Because the Rice professors, I mean, people could fail to talk about many things for a number of different reasons. But if you talk to history professors, it is clear that the writings of the time where people were saying that this was a miraculous event. It's not like
Yeah.
people said, "Oh, Jesus is resurrected from the dead."
But do you believe in, do you
His
believe in
own
it?
Let me finish.
Yeah, yeah, sorry.
His own
Sorry.
disciples didn't even believe it. When he appeared to them, they thought this was some ghost-like being. And he says, "No, no, no, guys, come and touch me. See, I have flesh and bones, as you see I have." And then he even demonstrated, but he said, "Have you something here to eat?" And they gave him a piece of fish, and he ate it in front of them. Thomas didn't believe it. They said, "Thomas, we've seen the risen Savior." Thomas said, I don't believe that. He thought it was an impostor. I mean, how can a person rise from the dead? Thomas said, "I won't believe it unless I stick my finger into the holes in his hands, and unless I stick my hand into the hole in his side." Because when Jesus was on the cross, he was thrust through with a sword into his side, with a spear into his side. Thomas inserted his fingers into the holes in Jesus' hands. He inserted his hand into the hole in Jesus' side. This is what it took for him to embrace this. This is a hard thing because resurrections are not a common thing. These are unique occurrences that are very hard, and so they're generally not going to be taught in history classes. However, the life of Jesus, the walk of Jesus. You have people like Will Durant. I don't know what the Rice history professors do. I've never even been in that building. But you take Will Durant. This is a pantheist. He says he's a pantheist. He looks at the gospel accounts, and what he writes, probably one of the greatest historians of the 20th century, he says the accounts of the gospel, the accounts of these evangelists, it could not be false. He says that the contradictions are of minutia. He says that for them to have written about so strong an ethic, of so strong a person, would have been more miraculous than the accounts that they were writing about. So there are historians like Will Durant that take hold of this thing. So I don't know why you keep saying that if rice historians don't do it, then the historians don't do it. No, there are non-believing historians like Will Durant that have studied this and come away and say, yes, these accounts are true. What they've written about is certainly
About
a
the
valid
resurrection or about?
ethic.
I have no doubt that Jesus existed as a person. I'm asking about the resurrection.
I'm
Or
talking about the resurrection. I'm talking about the resurrection. This is
so
why
why don't we
every
believe?
religious scholar will say that these men truly believed in the resurrection. They saw it with their own eyes and they died for it. Look, we have extra biblical accounts on how these men died. So, first of all, James is referenced in the Bible of how he died. But all the other ones, Peter was crucified upside down. One was flayed alive, which means they pin you to the ground, they peel the skin off you. Another one was boiled alive. So these men, they're going to be warming up the oil, and this warming up the oil, all the guy has to do is psych. I never saw the body. I never saw him raised from the dead. No, they all went to their death. These men are documented to have gone
Yeah.
to their death saying that Jesus Christ is risen from the dead. Nobody dies for what they know to be a lie. They don't. They don't die
Why
for
don't we
what they know
believe?
to be a lie. So these
Why don't we
men
believe in?
testify of this. If the world doesn't want to embrace it with all of this testimony that has gone forth, that's up to them. But these men are testifying of it.
I hear. I think I hear. I understand now. I think better what you're saying. So here's my burning question: Is why don't we believe the tales about Muhammad? Isn't that the same level of evidence?
Well, what tales about Muhammad are you talking about? First of all, I don't.
Like,
First of all, I don't know that there are the same amounts of evidence. You have just made a claim that I would be amazed if it were true. If tales in all religions have the same amount of substantiation of that giving in the Bible. From what I understand, there are far more documents by far of anything from antiquity, anything from that era. There's far more documents, valid documents from speaking of the things of the New Testament than anything close to what Muhammad has said. So, Jake, you just throw out these wild things and then you just go run with it. I don't know where your academic
no, it's a
background is
question. It's a
from,
question.
where you make
I'm not making.
such an
I'm not
accusation
making.
like this.
I'm not making an assertion. It was a question. I said why. My question was why don't we? And really, what? Sorry. What I meant to ask is like, my understanding of how history um and culture and mythology existed a couple thousand years ago were that you had these kind of like living oral traditions of like mythology within a culture that got transmitted generation after generation. And so in some cultures that were Christian, you had stories of Jesus Christ and the resurrection. In other cultures that were either Jewish or Hindu or Muslim, like in Islam, you have the stories about Muhammad. And so what I meant to ask is like in Christian culture, you have the tradition of um, telling the stories that you just told. And my question, what I wanted to ask was other cultures have other stories that conflict with the stories of Jesus Christ. And I don't know the answer to this, but I don't know how, as a Christian person knows that their stories are correct and the Muslim stories are wrong. I don't know the answer to that.
Okay. You just
Do you know?
said that there were other cultures that have stories that conflict with the stories of Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
Be specific.
So my understanding of Islam is that for Muhammad to be, I don't think that Muslims believe that Jesus Christ is the Son of God. Is that accurate?
I guess you'll have to ask a Muslim, but
Yeah.
from what I understand, but how is that? I don't understand how this somehow negates that he was the Son of God. I mean, some people might believe something, so that negates what the truth is here.
No, but look, you would agree that you would agree that a Muslim doesn't believe in Christianity, a Christian doesn't believe in Islam, a Jew doesn't believe
No,
in
but
Hinduism. Like you
I
would agree
think
that.
Muslims believe so much about what's written about in the Bible. I think they
Yeah.
believe they embrace uh, more than 90% of what's in the New Testament. I think that they probably embrace. This categoric claim of yours, I think is probably grossly exaggerated.
But my sorry. So let me. So my point is that a Christian. as a Christian, you don't believe in Islam, right? You don't believe that Muhammad. What's the claim about Muhammad? That he is the prophet. I don't know Islam that well. My point is that Christians like yourself, I would imagine, don't believe in Islam, right? And
Do
that
I do I
and a
believe
Muslim,
Islam exists? Yes. I mean, it's a world religion.
but
It's
you don't believe
huge.
that Muhammad rose, what is it, on a chariot into the heavens? Like, you don't believe the stories of Islam, right? I think.
Generally, probably not, but I'd have to study
Right.
these things. I don't know much about these, but
Yeah. Let me.
where are you going with this? But what I want you to do, Jake,
Yeah.
is I want you to
Yeah.
be
Yeah.
more accurate. I want you to be more
Okay.
specific and stop speaking
Sure.
in generalities because
Here we go.
you
I
keep
just looked it
throwing
up.
before me these generalities, and I have no idea where you're going, and you keep throwing out generalities, and I'm wondering. What on earth are you getting at? And what do you don't
So
I
Islam.
feel that you don't even know where you're going. You don't even know where you're going, Jake.
I think I'm probably doing a bad job making my point. My point about Islam, my point is that Islam contradicts with Christianity and vice versa. Islam believes that Muhammad is the messenger of God, and Christianity does not believe that. There's two different religions with two different views and two different stories. That's all I'm trying to say. And I think you.
Christianity predates Islam 600 years.
Yeah.
Christianity doesn't write about Muhammad. Christianity doesn't even reference Muhammad. The last documents of Christianity were written 500 years before Muhammad
Mhm.
was even born. How could they even reference him?
I think something about my rhetoric is making it seem like I'm uh, making points that are crazy, but I really think the point I'm trying to make is something that you and I both agree with. All I'm trying to say is that the religions have different views. That's all I'm trying to say. The views about what that Muslims believe about
Yes, so they have
religion
different
are
views,
different.
and your point
Right.
is?
That how do we know the views of Christians are accurate when the views of Muslims are not?
Well, I'll tell you. I mean, it's really interesting. Jesus said, uh, um, "If anyone is willing to do my will, he will know of the teaching, whether it is of God or whether I speak from myself." I think the Bible has so much documentation. There is I'm not talking about 2 times or 3 times. I'm talking about 100 or 1,000 times more documents concerning the authenticity of the New Testament than there is from anything else of that era. When we look at documents, and we are very, very close in time period to the originals, which is never the case with other historical quote unquote facts from that era. And then you have put on top of that enormous prophecy that these things would come to pass. So we have the Isaiah scrolls, the book of Isaiah, which talks about the coming of Jesus. Isaiah 52, verse 13 through 15, and all of Isaiah 53, describing the crucifixion, describing Jesus giving himself on the cross. So much so that there were many scholars, Jewish scholars, that thought that that was a Christian insertion after the first century because it looks so much like Jesus. But then in the 1940s, 1950s, when the Dead Sea Scrolls were found in the 1940s or so, these predate the coming of Jesus. The whole Isaiah scroll, the whole book of Isaiah has been found that dates to 150 BC. So 150 years before Jesus was born on earth, we have the Isaiah scroll, which matches with the Isaiah that we had, because prior to that, the oldest Jewish document that we had was the Masoretic text, about 1000 AD. But then we found the Dead Sea Scrolls, and we have the entire, in one piece, the Isaiah scrolls. And these then document, before Jesus was ever born, these things that would happen to him. So you have all of this underlying prophecy. Then you have all of these accounts of battles, of wars, of kings, these kingdoms, which match up with lots of other pieces of history that you would love because the Rice professors teach it in the history department, that match up with the biblical record. So it is so much firmer than what you are being dismissive of. I don't know, but I doubt, but I'm no expert on it. I doubt if Islam, which started in 600 AD, has nearly the matchup with history and prophecy that the New Testament has underpinning it from the Old Testament, except that those portions of the Quran, which are a lot, that take biblical stories, and therefore it came directly from the Bible. But of its own, I don't know that it has that. So that's why I think that it's harder for me to embrace that.
Yeah. No, thank you. And I said at the beginning of this call, I want this to be a good faith argument. And I need to rewatch his recordings because there's something about either my tone or my questions. Maybe I come off as passive aggressive or sarcastic, but whenever I talk to a religious Christian and I push them on Christianity and their views, I seem to upset them. And maybe you could give me feedback about the way I'm asking
Yeah,
questions.
I don't think it was just my religious faith. I
Okay.
think you pushed me the same way on Origin of Life.
Yeah. Well, I want to push people. I want to ask them questions.
And the other thing, Jake, is I'm not upset with you because we're having a dialogue here, and so but you didn't just do this with my religious faith. I've not watched any of your other podcasts. My producer said, yeah, this would be a good one to go on to. So, and he had his reasons for that. And I get invited a lot to go on podcasts, and I only agree to a few. And because I have a whole nother life. I'm not just a podcast or YouTube person. I have a whole nother life. But no, I mean, you were saying silly things concerning Origin of Life, which ticked me off. I mean, you say silly little things, and you would make some global statement that was totally untrue, and then you would go on. You did the same thing when it came to faith. So what I think you need to do is you need to do a little bit better research and not make global claims that are silly, that are going to get people upset, because
Okay.
it appeared to me like you had very little knowledge about what was going on here. And then
Mm.
you're asking questions, and you're trying to push back, but you didn't have a whole lot behind it. That's what I think.
Origin of Life, I think I asked some questions that were flat off. I asserted that I asserted what I thought was your view, and that was wrong. With religion, I'm asking honest questions. I genuinely have this confusion about, maybe I think in terms that are too black and white, but I had this confusion about, well, on one hand, it's like I want to trust the historians, but on the other hand, in the case of Jesus, if I want to believe in these stories, then I have to believe that there's another way to believe things in reality. Like, in other words, we can't just rely on his what's sort of like secularly like acknowledged as true. We also have to consider that there's another sort of like realm of understanding that goes beyond just like what they teach in secular school. And where I really struggle is like, well, if something is, you know, understood to be the truth, and then it should be considered secular knowledge, But I
No,
think your
no,
point is that it's
you have a whole lot of faith in secular knowledge.
yeah.
But go ahead. I want to let you finish.
No, that's my whole point. That was my. I was just kind of restating my own
Yeah.
confusion.
So,
Um,
so, so there is the miraculous in the Bible. Like I'm saying, 95% of what's in the Bible is not miraculous in the sense that it's documented historical things that happen. And you get into the book of Acts, and there's a lot of miracles going on, but not nearly as much as you get in the Gospels. In the Gospels, it is just chock full of miracles that Jesus is doing. In the Old Testament, there are miracles, not nearly as many as what you see in the Gospels, in the four Gospels. I mean, amazing number. So miracles are things that are functioning outside the domain of typically where science studies. There's a lot of things that science can't study very well, and there can be many sorts of answers. So the analogy that John Lennox uses is so you have a pot boiling water on the stove, and you say, why is that water boiling? You say, well, the heat transfer is occurring from the fire beneath it. It's causing the molecules to move rapidly, and when the molecules, the vapor pressure above the liquid equals the atmospheric pressure, then it's going to start boiling because enough of these were moved up into the vapor phase. That's an explanation. Another explanation could be that a pot is boiling because I want a cup of tea. And so there are two valid arguments that are approached quite differently. And science will generally take the one and not the other. And so there's many things in life that science doesn't well explain. Why do I love my wife in such a special way after 42 years of marriage, and I just treasure her? I mean, there's some things that it's hard for science to describe. It's not just the miraculous. There's some mundane things that science does not describe very well. And you can talk about the effect of molecules on certain sites in the brain and how these things happen. There are other things that are very hard to describe. Why is it that if I'm looking at a person and staring at the back of their head, how do they kind of sense that somebody is staring at them? There are things that sometimes go beyond science that are hard to understand in terms of the science that we know today. They might not
I
be.
agree with that.
They
I could never prove like my wife loves me or something. Like love is, but let me ask a question. Is that can we use that analogy? Like can we say that in the same way we can't measure love, that we also in that like our historical events, like can we put that in the same category and say like, things like love we can't measure, and likewise there are certain historical events which also are in that same kind of realm of like less tangible. Is that a good analogy?
Well, I mean, maybe it's not that I think there may be ways to measure love. You can look at how much time does one person start thinking about another person, and that may have something to do with it, or how much are they affected by pain that other person might be going through. I have 4 children, and if one of my children is going through something, 80% of my central processing unit is thinking about that child that's going through something. And I dearly love that child. But if a student is going through the same thing that my child is going through, I might think about it for a nanosecond, and then I'm off to another thing. So there may be ways of measuring this, and but when you get to a miraculous thing, it's harder for people to buy into because they're not used to it. But you can look at historical accounts of what people said about this thing, and that they go to their grave saying it. If they just didn't say it, if they just denied it, it wouldn't happen. And now they're being killed. They're being boiled in oil. I mean, this is pretty amazing. This is a pretty amazing accounts, and these people were not known to be liars. And so you see these accounts, and it's hard to just throw this at the doorstep of nonsense. This is what I'm talking about. These things, and then the command that it takes, and to the people who embrace this ethic and the ethic of Jesus's teaching, they see the effects of it upon their life. They see the effects of the change. I mean, you can say, give a man an education and he'll be all better. But you can also say, you give a man Jesus, and if he embraces this, it changes lives dramatically. And I see this all the time. It changes lives dramatically. It does something that communism doesn't do for the man, that socialism doesn't do for the man, that this liberation that comes in the resurrection of Jesus Christ. So you even see the effects of it in people's lives. Now, that doesn't make it therefore true, his resurrection, but you see the effects of it all the time.
Can I ask you about your life, or I think we're running out of time.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
I want to pivot from me pissing you off and ask questions about you, Professor James Torr. I didn't know this about you, but you said that you are Jewish and you're of Christian faith. So tell me about your journey into Christianity.
Okay, so I was born a Jew. I will die a Jew. So I still look at myself as a Jew. I believe Jesus is the Messiah and that he's risen from the dead. And I believe that he is the Messiah that was prophesied, the Messiah that was written about. And I believe that he's coming twice. The first time he came as the suffering servant, as is written about in many of the books of the Old Testament. And then the next time he comes, he's going to come as the reigning king that's going to defeat his enemies. So it's the one who comes twice. A Jew may say today, well, Jesus never fulfilled it because, he should be the reigning king. Well, that's just half of it. Or they will say that there were two different messiahs, the suffering one and then the reigning one. They will talk about this. But if you look at pre-Christian era writings, many Jews embraced the fact that the Messiah would come twice, that he'd come and that he'd come a second time. They want to do away with this because they want to somehow obscure this. So, yeah, I was born a Jew. I was never a very good Jew. I was not a very devout Jew. I grew up in a secular Jewish home. I was born in New York City. I grew up just north of the city, and I grew up as a secular Jew. And when I was 18 years old, somebody presented the gospel to me. I was open to it. Most Jews are not open to it because most Jews are not a clean slate. You take a Chinese student or something, they're a clean slate. I mean, it's very easy to share with them. You take a Jew, they have been taught against Jesus. The writings, the Jewish writings, the Talmudic writings speak against Jesus. They have nothing good to say about him, and so they're taught against him. They're taught against him by the rabbis. The rabbis say, I didn't even know Jesus was Jewish. Did you know Jesus was Jewish?
Uh, yeah.
Yeah, I didn't know that when I was 18. Who knew? I mean, I
What
thought
did they say he was?
I'm sorry?
No, I thought that was common.
No, the rabbis taught us that Jesus was a Christian. Yeah, yeah.
No, he was Jewish, and then his followers started Christianity after his death.
Well, yeah. In fact, they didn't start Christianity. His followers were called Christians, and it was almost a derogatory name. They were first called Christians in Antioch, the Bible says. And Peter said, don't be ashamed when they call you that name. That was a name that other people called them. And then Peter said, okay, you can embrace that name and just embrace it. But it was a name that other people called them, like King Agrippa said to Paul, I mean, you're going to make me into a Christian. So it was more of a derogatory name at first. So they didn't go out to start Christianity. This was just an offshoot of a continuation of Judaism. And then when I was 18, he shared the gospel with me. And
who is he? Who's he?
Oh,
Sorry.
this was another student. Another student.
A student. Sorry, a student of what?
His major, you're asking me?
No, sorry, student like in your high school or
Student in
your...
college. In college.
Got it. So you're. So I'm I'm trying to follow the story. So
I was in
college,
college,
and at that point, you were not yet. You didn't yet consider yourself a follower of Christianity, and I think you said you were 18.
Yeah, I was 18, and if somebody asked me, I'd have said I'm a Jew, even though I wasn't a very faithful Jew. And he opened the Bible and he read a verse, and it says, "For all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God." That's in the book of Romans. And I read that verse, and I said, "I'm not a sinner. I haven't sinned." And to some people that would sound silly. Well, I understand exactly why I said that. In modern secular Judaism, we don't regard little things as sin. I said to him, I never robbed a bank. I never killed anybody. How could I be a sinner? Big things are sin, not little things. And so then he turned to another verse in Matthew chapter 5, verse 28. Jesus said, anyone who looks at a woman with lust for her has committed adultery with her already in his heart. And that really got me. I was addicted to pornography from the age of 14. There was no internet. I was working in a gas station on the Hutchinson River Parkway, just north of the city, and just north of New York City. And it was on the highway, and my job at the age of 14 was to clean the restrooms and clean the parking lots. And I would find these magazines, particularly on Friday nights. Guys would throw away their magazines after their sales week. And I became addicted to pornography. By the time I was 18, people who have addictions understand what the word addiction means. This is not just an interest in pornography. This was addiction to pornography. I read that verse and I was deeply convicted. And why should I have been convicted? Why should I even care what as far as I knew, some Christian guy says 2,000 years ago? What does that have to do with me? But when Jesus is getting hold of your heart, Jake, his words have this enormous power over you. And I read that verse, and it says, if you look at a woman with lust for her, Jake, I couldn't look at a woman any other way. That's the only way I knew how to look at a woman. And you've committed adultery in your heart. Now, I was enough of a Jew to know adultery was wrong. How could I commit adultery in my heart? Adultery is a physical thing. Uh, but I'm guilty now of adultery. So Jesus' words just hit me. And that is the first moment in my life that I ever looked at myself as being a sinner. And I remember I said to the guy, if that's the definition of sin, then I am a sinner. And then he went through the basic tenets of Christianity, just going verse by verse, that there's nothing that I can do in myself to change this. There's no work that I can do to work my way out of it, which is totally non-Jewish, at least in Judaism that I knew. It may be different than Orthodox Judaism. But what I knew, you always want to do something to make God happy with you. You wear a little yarmulke on your head, it makes God happy with you. You light a candle, you say a prayer, you go to synagogue, and God will be happy with you. And the Bible says there's nothing you can do to get this. All of this comes by an act of grace. It is an undeserved gift that you get this. And then that Jesus gave himself for me. He paid the penalty for me, the penalty that I deserve. He paid it. But then what happened is 2 months later, so I'm thinking about this thing. I didn't make any conversions at that moment. I had met some Christians, and I found them to be very nice people. I remember going to the cafeteria, and you go to the cafeteria, you don't want to sit alone. You know this feeling where you don't want to sit alone? It's kind of embarrassing. You want to sit with other people. Nowadays,
Yeah.
it's probably a little easier because you just look at your smartphone and you're watching a YouTube video, you're into yourself. But back then, if you were sitting alone, you were some kind of nerd. And so there was this group of people, and they invited me, oh, hey, come and join us. And I knew a couple of the guys, but not well. But I noticed that they were Christians because they were praying before they ate. But that's not what struck me. What struck me was their laughter. When they were laughing, they weren't laughing at anybody. They were just enjoying each other. And what I had known is if you have a group of young people laughing, they're laughing at somebody, and that somebody is feeling pain in their heart. All of us have experienced that pain of being laughed at. Now, these are good folks. Anyway, I was in my room, so he shared with me, and then a few months later, I was in my room all alone. And I got on my knees. I'm not even sure why I did that, because most Christians I had seen were sitting when they pray. Most Jews, we stand when we pray. And I got on my knees and I said, Lord, forgive me, because I am a sinner. I felt this amazing sense of peace drop down on me, and this burden of sin just start to lift on me. Boom! Off to my right, Jesus is standing. It's crazy. It's not something I clearly see with my eyes, but the presence is so real, just 3 feet away from me. And I don't know how I knew this was Jesus, it wasn't like he wear a name tag. Hello, my name is Jesus. I mean, I just knew. And right away, I put my face to the ground, and I was already on my knees, and I just started weeping, and it was like liquid love pouring over me. And he wasn't going away, just kindness and love like I had never known. I never had a day like that before. I never had a day like that afterward. That was November 7th, 1977. And just love poured over me. It wasn't like he was gone in a flash. He was just there. And I was just weeping. And I remember standing up after that. I'm wiping my eyes, and I can't stop thinking about Jesus. I'm thinking about Jesus all the time. In my dreams at night, I'm dreaming about Jesus. In my dreams at night, I'm dreaming about telling people about Jesus. Jew, telling people about Jesus in his dreams. Think about that. And it's crazy. I didn't know, Jake, that was a prophetic dream, that he was showing me what my life was going to be like. I share with people about Jesus all the time. I didn't make the association between Jesus being the Messiah and Yeshua. I wasn't a good enough Jew to know about this sort of stuff. I was just touched by God. I didn't tell anybody. I didn't know what it meant. I didn't know what happened to me. But I was thinking about Jesus all the time. The guy who had shared with me 2 months earlier, he saw me walking on the floor. He says, Jim, have you received Jesus in your heart? I said, I think I have. Why do you ask? He said, you haven't stopped smiling for weeks. He said, something's different about you. And I certainly felt different. And I said, how can I stay close to God? I've never felt close to God like this. He said, if you read the Bible every day, you'll stay close to God. If you don't, you won't. Jake, 46 years I have read the Bible every day of my life. And I mean every day. I start in Genesis chapter 1. I read all the way through to Revelation chapter 22. When I'm done, I start again. And I just pick up where I left off the day before. I don't try to get through the Bible in a year. I could spend a week in a paragraph, a week on a page. I mean, I'm just enjoying it. And I read it because I love it. And it's become a part of my life. That's my story.
Incredible. Thank you for sharing that. It sounds like a lot, your faith stemmed from that remarkable experience you had as well. This wasn't like, oh, let me go figure out, pull out my calculator and figure out if Jesus is real. This was a lived, experienced, spiritual awakening you had.
Yes.
Well, yep.
And I've taken the Bible and I've made it a part of my life. I mean,
Well,
I'm talking every day of my life for 46 years. Imagine if you read a book over and over again for 46 years. And so I love it. And every time I go through it, I get more out of it. God speaks to me through the pages of Scripture. That's how he speaks to me, through the pages of Scripture. And I love it. To me,
and it's
that
brought you
is life.
tremendous, and it sounds like it's brought you tremendous happiness and meaning and joy.
Happiness, meaning it changed everything. It changed the type of woman that I wanted to marry. It changed how I wanted to work with my family, how I wanted to bring up my children. Yeah, and it changed how I deal with people, how I approach my work. My work, I want to work to the glory of God. I want to glorify God through my work. I prayed, Lord, show me things that I wouldn't normally see. Lord, bless my students, fill them with creativity. Just like Bezalel in the Bible, it says God called Bezalel by name, the son of Uri, the son of Hur, the tribe of Judah. And I've filled him with the Spirit of God in wisdom, in understanding, and in knowledge of all types of craftsmanship. Exodus chapter 31, verse 2 and 3. He called by name a man. This is the man that Moses commissioned to build a tabernacle. He could work in gold, in silver, and in bronze, in stone cutting, in stone setting. He could work in wood, in fabric, and perfuming, and he had the ability to teach it. I mean, and as
Yeah.
I say, Lord, make me like Bezalel. Lord, let me work across all different fields. Make me like Bezalel. Give us great creativity, Lord. And so it affects how I approach my work. It affects how I deal with people. It affects if I blow somebody off, I'm going to go back and apologize to them because I'm accountable to Jesus. It affects the way I deal with other people. So it affects the way I dealt with my children, the way I treat my wife, all of this, and so to me, Jesus has poured so much into me. In return, I owe him my all.
Wow, it's beautiful. Um, your story is incredible. You were not born into this; you found this, and you became a Christian authentically through your own experiences, and it sounds like you really felt it. You saw him and you experienced him, and in your life, the effects of believing in Jesus as well, as you've said.
Yeah,
Well,
that's an important part of my life. I love it. Thanks for giving me the opportunity to share that. And
yeah.
if any of your listeners does not
Hmm.
believe in the physical resurrection of Jesus Christ, and they'd
Hmm.
like to give me an hour, I will give them an hour of my time, and I will talk to them over Zoom for 1 hour, and I will share
Hmm.
with them about why I embrace the resurrection of
Yeah,
Jesus Christ. Any of your listeners,
yeah.
just send an email to tour, T-O-U-R, at drjamestour.org, tour@drjamestour.org, and I will respond back, usually fairly
Mm,
quickly. But this is for people who don't believe.
yeah.
People who believe,
A-
I can't keep up with all of the people who believe, but
And
people who don't
can we
believe.
tell, like, would it be fair to tell listeners that um your belief in Jesus, a lot of it came out of that experience, in your heart, in your mind, what you felt. Um this wasn't some, like, you know, what I was describing before as like, oh, we have this method for ascertaining historical truth. You weren't looking in the
It
textbooks.
wasn't.
You were kind of in your heart, you found the reality of Jesus, right?
Absolutely, Jake. That's
Yeah.
absolutely right. It was in my heart. It was not so
Got
much
it.
in my head. There are
And
some,
now we can't rely on our heart for everything. Like, if I
yeah,
say in my heart
yeah,
I believe in a spaghetti monster,
yeah.
we can't do that. But with certain things, we can trust our heart,
Well,
right?
I am just saying, I came to the
Yeah.
Lord through my heart. And I think most people come to him through their heart. There are some that do, investigation and it comes through their head. That was not the case with me. Plus, I was only
Yeah.
18. I mean, think back to when you were 18. you're not very sophisticated. At least I wasn't. Maybe there's some people that are, but I wasn't. I was just a regular guy. And, people think that my IQ is much higher than it really is. And I was just really a regular guy. And so it wasn't a very sophisticated thing. It touched
Yeah.
me in my heart. And I,
Well, thank.
yeah, go ahead.
No, I'm sorry for interrupting you. I don't mean to do that. Please, as you were saying.
Yeah, I mean, when this burden of sin lifted from me and I felt the love of God embrace me, I mean, and then I couldn't stop thinking about Jesus and I'm dreaming about him. And my expression changes so much that people are saying, something's happened to you. You're different. That's the impact that it had on my life. And from that day, from November 7th, 1977, the trajectory of everything changed. And even my academic trajectory. I was thrown into the honors program because I was a chemistry major. So some professor in his wisdom said, oh, well, you should be in the honors program. I needed to be just with the regular masses of people. I thought these people that I'm up against, they'd been studying chemistry since they were in kindergarten or something, it seemed to me. And so I was struggling in freshman chemistry, my first semester. I was struggling. And I ended up, though, with a B plus after that first semester. And after that, it was just straight A's. I mean, it just,
Wow.
the total reflow. And I was like, I graduated of all the chemistry majors, I was number one in my class. And I took every graduate organic chemistry course that I could take as an undergraduate, and I was the top of every one of those classes. I'm telling you, everything in my life started to change at that point. And even the pornography addiction was gone. After that day, it was gone. I didn't even notice it. It's like if your knee is hurting you for a week and then it stops hurting, you don't notice it at first. You're like, hey, my knee's not hurting anymore. It was like that. I didn't even realize that I was freed from this. Now, I had a lot of other problems that I wasn't immediately freed from, but that one God used to convict me of my sin. That one, he showed me his power of deliverance.
Wow.
The addiction of pornography was gone that day. Yeah, this is amazing what happened to me.
It's incredible.
Yeah.
It really is. I appreciate you sharing this with me. I gotta run. I'm having dinner at my sister's place. It's
I
and this has been marvelous. Thank you so much for sharing your story. Can I end the recording and can you and I just wrap up for a couple minutes before we get going? Here, let me end.